For our final webinar of the series, Planning to Plan. And just as a reminder, the North Carolina Forest Service, we do have different materials we are updating and trying to keep updated on our webpage, and you're welcome to take a look there. We have some management information for communities, reference information for individuals, and some links as well. But what our final topic is about the importance of planning for trees, and that includes not just maintenance, but also planning on where you're putting trees. So whether that is on an individual homeowner's basis, like this little picture there. Small trees get bigger, and they need larger space than what people necessarily picture. So whether you're a homeowner or whether you're in a municipality, so while this is a particularly bad example of poor planning on the part of parking lot design, even what we see typically with parking lots and those little islands or little fingers that come out from the edges where trees are squeezed in are not ideal, and really in the long run you're just wasting plant material by putting it in there. And certainly, as an example, here's trees, very large trees having been topped, and you can see the kind of response the tree has. And ultimately, those trees will need to be removed. So maintenance, but also understanding how trees grow is an important part of planning. And it's more than just a pretty landscape design. Here we have something where we can see there's a lovely space that's being designed, but if we look a little closer on the right-hand side, we can see that there's nothing really indicated on how those trees are going to be growing. On the far side of the reflecting pond, you can see that there's nothing that shows what kind of growing space the trees are in, while on the side that does have the green, you can see it's relatively narrow. Is that going to be sufficient for the number of trees they've got planted? What kind of materials are going to be underneath? So drawing a pretty picture and saying we want trees is not a plan, and it isn't sufficient in the long run for what we want, which is actual viable green infrastructure. So when we plan and we want to include trees, the trees have to be considered and planned for from the very beginning. So that is kind of the direction we're coming from, and we have Dr. Todd Watson, who I've known for a number of years and have been able to work with and listen to his speaking. He is a PhD with international experience in plant health care for over 25 years, and provides consulting services to many companies and properties for the U.S. and beyond. He's an adjunct professor in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management at Texas A&M, where he was named a Montague Teaching Scholar in 2005. He is also a member of the International Society of Arboriculture and past president of the ISA Texas chapter, a ISA board certified master arborist, and was voted Texas Arborist of the Year in 2003. He's authored several articles in research journals and professional publications, and provided numerous tree and landscape presentations throughout the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. So Todd, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, very good. Just double checking, make sure that you can hear me okay?
Double checking.
Okay, great.
Yes.
For those of you who are waiting for this webinar to start, that was my fault. I had a major computer malfunction that lasted about an hour and finished about 3 minutes after the webinar was supposed to start. So sorry to keep you waiting. I do appreciate the opportunity to be here today to present this webinar, and I want to thank everybody else for being here. As you notice, the topic was tree maintenance, and I teach a couple times a year a 32-hour course on tree maintenance. Well, we don't have 32 hours because it's a broad topic. So since I've got a little over an hour today, I'm going to focus on what I think is the most important topic. And since I started late, and even though I'm from Texas and I'm supposed to talk slow, I'm going to talk at probably about 180 words a minute with gust of 240, so hang in there. What we're going to talk about is the very beginning, right? We're going to talk about tree planting. And if we get this wrong, it cost us a lot in money, time, grief, heartache. So we're going to talk a little bit about poor structure and dying trees and slow growth and some of those things that, you know, we didn't get what we had really hoped that we were going to get from the beginning. So if you know, I'm going to try to make this really simple, because if you know what the problems are, the solutions are simple, and not only are they simple, they're inexpensive. And my goal here is to talk about not tree planting necessarily as a single topic, but talk about urban forest sustainability. So let me go back from to the beginning here. This poster probably describes me best. It could be that the purpose of your life is only to serve as a warning to others. The reason I'm teaching this seminar is because of my vast and lengthy experience at killing trees. That's the best way to find out how to keep them alive. So this mayhem all started about 36 years ago. Here I am. I was probably about 14. I'm in my grandmother's backyard, and I'm planting trees, and I did it just the way they told me to do it. I put a lot of gravel in the bottom of the hole, which we know is bad now because it creates a perch water table. I planted them nice and deep, just like the nursery told me, which we know is bad, and then I cut them back. Took about 50% of the canopy out, which is what they told me, which is also bad. So needless to say, all these trees died, and that was my start in the tree business. So, you know, we've all kind of done some things in our past that we regret, right? So we're not going to be judgmental here. We're just going to learn and take those mistakes and move forward. For those of you who, I don't know how old the people are in the webinar, but if you don't remember the 70s and 80s, just think tattoos, right? Someday you're going to regret that tattoo when your skin starts getting all saggy. Take it from somebody who kind of knows. All right, you heard Nancy talking about the right tree in the right place. That's very important in that we plan ahead and we put the right tree in the right place. And I know this sounds simple, and it is, but it's amazing how many people don't do it. I get asked all the time, what's a good tree to plant? Well, that depends on a lot of factors. What's the soil pH, how much space, what's the average low temperature for the area? So although these are very important topics, I don't have the time to address all of them today, so I'm going to focus more on specific problems commonly found with nursery-grown tree stock. I do want to touch on one issue, though, for matching trees with their environment. Most people wouldn't recommend planting a cactus in Alaska because it'd be the wrong plant in the wrong place, or might be the right plant in the wrong place or the wrong plant in the right place. It wouldn't be the right plant in the right place. However, we do this all the time. If we look at our nursery stock, provenance, plant provenance is very important. And provenance just deals with the origin of a plant's genetic makeup. Where did it come from? What environment did it grow in? So, for example, many cacti are generally better suited for an environment with low rainfall. Trees propagated from plants in the same area as the planting site are likely to be well adapted or better adapted to the climatic conditions of your particular site. However, there's a lot of tree cultivars in the nursery that have been developed or selected for, you know, different factors, cold tolerance, high soil pH, those kind of things. And they just don't really work well in the location where you're putting them. Also, native trees, because we talk a lot about planting native trees, but think about an urban environment. Some of you live in urban environments that are 10 degrees warmer than where those trees are growing outside the urban environment. And so those may not be the best adapted trees for the environment. In my area, where I am, we have a problem with shoe-marred red oaks. And the problem is that a lot of Texas is an alkaline, high pH soil, and a lot of our nursery stock, where they collect the acorns for these trees, come from areas further east, where I'm sure a lot of you are, where the pH is a lot lower. Well, those trees are doing fine in their natural habitat. They do fine in a nursery because of the container substrate that they're growing in, and it's fairly low pH. You put them in the ground, and they tank because those trees are not well adapted for that particular site. And so one of the things you need to do, if at all possible, and it, you know, I'm talking to the whole United States here, so it's going to vary based on your location, but to try to find out where that seed source came from so you get a better idea if it's going to work in your area or not. The title that I had there at the beginning is sort of the, you know, if you can't see the urban forest for the dying trees, you need some new specs. Well, here's your specs. Actually, these are standards, and these are brand new. It took them forever to come out with the next edition, but it just came out 2014. You can go online and search for American Standards for Nursery Stock. You can get a free copy. This is the only ANSI standard, and ANSI stands for American National Standards Institute. It's the only ANSI standard that I know of that's for free in our industry. And so this is developed not from on high, from somebody in government that's smarter than we are, but this is a consensus of arborists, landscapers, nursery professionals who come together to put together these ANSI standards for us. And so, as I mentioned before, this is not a how to plant a tree talk. This is a how to have a healthy, cost-efficient, and sustainable urban forest talk. And so if you kind of think about this like programming a computer, you put junk in, you get junk out. If the engineers that had to do a lot of recalculations, you know, in the days before we had computers and computer problems like I had today, but when they had to recalculate the re-entry of Apollo 13, if it had been off by just 2 degrees, Apollo 13 would have missed the Earth by 11,121 miles. So how you start out determines where you end up, and it's really important. So that's why I wanted to deal with this topic, because most of us do a lot of tree planting. So if you look in the American Standards for Nursery Stock, at the beginning, in the new one, it talks about tree structure. So you don't want to buy, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but the tree on the left, because someday it's going to look something similar to the tree on the right as it gets larger, and these codominant stems start to have included bark. They have the narrow V-shaped crotches, and they fall apart. This will cost you money over the long term, so they're not a good investment. They could cost a lot of money if they someday cause property damage, or even worse, if they harm or kill a person. And I serve as an expert witness in court cases, and unfortunately this kind of stuff happens all the time. But I'm going to spend most of my time dealing with the landscape below ground, all right, dealing with the rootstock. And the American Standard for Nursery Stock deals with container-grown trees, with bare root trees, with balled and burlap trees. And so what I'm going to do today, even though we're starting to get some really good research on bare root trees, Dr. Nina Bassick at Cornell and some others have been using bare root trees successfully. I'm going to talk about the problems that we have with balled and burlap trees, and mostly with container-grown trees, which is what we see mostly throughout the country. So we're going to talk about a lot of things that cause mild to severe transplant shock when planting trees. Transplant shock is usually the result of a tree's roots being unable to supply a sufficient amount of water to support the transpirational needs of the canopy. This can occur for a variety of reasons, including poor architecture of the root system and the root ball, being planted too deep or being too deep in the container, having an insufficiently sized root ball, improper watering, all those kind of things. So this is something my wife brought home. I don't normally want to get in lawsuits, but boy, I really considered it on this one. She bought a pound cake and only got 10 ounces. Right? If you buy a pound cake, you're paying for 16 ounces, not 10 ounces. That's false advertising. Well, same kind of thing happens in urban forestry as well, where you get this tree and, man, they're offering a great deal on it because they don't want to bump it up to the next container size. This thing is way overgrown. You know, you look at this tree and you go, wow, that's in about a 30-gallon container, and I'm going to get a tree that's at least 100 gallons, and that's a good deal. Well, no, you didn't get the 100 gallons that you need to have a sufficiently sized root ball. So even though this tree might have been a good deal, you know, was it really that good of a deal? Because this tree is going to cause you a lot of problems. One of the great things that at least most of the nurseries that I've dealt with have ignored, and a lot of people that write specifications for plant material have ignored, are these root ball sizes. And if you look, this is straight out of the brand new ANSI Z60.1 American Standards for Nursery Stock. And if you look in the left column over here, you'll see that it gives you trunk caliper usually measured at about 6 inches up from the soil line. Depending, when you get bigger, we usually measure them a little bit higher. So for ball and burlap in the second column, we've got minimum root ball diameter and minimum root ball depth on the third column. And then in the fourth column, you've got an acceptable container classes. I kind of like the old standards better. They sort of had a minimum container size, because we see in the old standards a minimum container size for a 3-inch diameter tree was 45 gallons, which to me is too small. And it's still listed here on the minimum, but really those things should be in a bigger size container. Trees will survive. You can plant them if the top of the tree is too large for the container, but it's going to give you more problems, because all of your roots are within the root ball of that container when you first plant it. And when you're trying to irrigate the tree, that root ball is all the water that it's going to hold for the roots. Anything that occurs outside doesn't help that tree until the roots have grown out into the surrounding soil. So this is where one of the places where we get transplant shock. That root ball dries out so quickly. In some environments, you may need to irrigate twice a day or more, or find a way to keep them irrigated continually. So we'll talk about that without also overwatering these trees. So this root ball size is really important. Let me just give you one example. This is a property. These trees are all the same species. They're all the same size box trees. They were, I think, 36-inch box trees, if I remember. They were from the same nursery. And so the landscape architect goes out. These trees are planted in the fall. The best time in most areas, unless your ground is frozen, to plant trees is in the fall, because then the trees have some time to grow roots out into the surrounding soil, so they can extract more water when it gets really hot and dry. So this was about May, I think, when I came out to look, and you can see these trees over here on the left side do not look as good as the trees on the right side. And they were freaking out. What's the problem? Is we have an irrigation problem. And so when I went out there and looked at those trees and measured the root ball and measured the caliper and then looked at the ANSI standards, these trees on the left were really, they had grown so much that they really need to be bumped up to the next size container. These trees on the right actually met the ANSI specs. And what happened was, and I do the same thing and try not to, I have to consciously not do it, but when you go out to the nursery, you pick the biggest, baddest, nicest looking trees that they have available for the money to plant, and that's what they did. They came through and selected all these trees in the fall, and then the next spring they came back and sorted the wallflowers that were left there waiting for the dance. Then they selected those trees and planted them in the spring, which was not as good a time to plant them. And the only difference between the two was the ratio or the relationship of the canopy to the size of root ball. Now, eventually these trees were covered. You go there today, you can't even tell the difference between them. So it's not that bad, but you just don't want this problem. You don't want someone calling you and, hey, what's the problem with these trees? And you try to explain to them, well, root balls are a little small, but they'll be okay. Having that properly sized root ball is really important. All right, so let me switch gears here a little bit. If you look at trees in nature, you will see that their root flares, their buttress roots, their major roots are on top of the ground. That's the way trees grow, because tree roots need air. You know, we don't think about it, but how long can you go without air? 3-4 minutes before you die? How long can you go without water? 3-4 days before you die? If you kind of think about that with trees, tree roots need air. They can't breathe in their leaves and send air down to their roots. All the parts, living cells, have to be able to get air. So it's really important that those roots are close to the surface. But this is a major problem that we have when dealing with, see if I can switch the slide here. It's not wanting to switch. When dealing with trees, because we get trees that end up being too deep. If you look at this root ball, you can see, or you can't see, a root flare. You can't see the buttress roots on this tree. And if you dig down, you still can't see them, right? If a tree looks like a telephone pole in the soil or in the root ball, telephone pole meaning it just goes straight down, there's a problem. You should see those roots, just like in the prior slide where we could see in what occurs in nature with those, you know, that root flare up on top of the soil. And in this tree, you keep digging down to try to find where is that first primary root that comes out of the trunk. And so for this particular one, okay, maybe you bought a tree that was the root ball diameter met ANSI specs, but it was too deep in the soil. This is all that you got in roots. So when you hold this thing up, the black line, right, indicates the root ball that you bought, and maybe it met ANSI specifications, but this is really the root ball that you got, is this red one. And so those trees tank. They do not, either they don't survive or they grow really slowly. Here's just another example. And if you'll notice on these slides, I get a lot of slides from Ed Gilman. He has great information. You know, you can search for his name on the internet. He's the first name that comes up. If you search for Todd Watson, it's down to about 1,384. But his comes up. He's got great slides, slideshows that you can use if you need to teach people about trees. And so you'll see these. But you can see the tree up in the top. That was the tree when it was planted. No root flare visible, but you can see the top of the root ball. This tree hung in for 2 or 3 years, and then it died and had to be pulled out. And that's the picture in the bottom, where you see the blue arrow showing you where the top of that root ball was. Look how far down it was to get to the roots. However, those roots are trying to come back up to the surface. One of the things we don't realize in a lot of instances, and this is going to vary depending upon the soils that you have in your area, most of the roots, 90% plus, are in the upper 12 to 18 inches of soil. The less air you have in the soil, like a heavy clay soil, the closer they are to the surface. So these roots are trying to grow back up to the surface, but a tree can't move its buttress roots. They're coming straight out of the trunk. They can't move them up. And so this is a bad idea. This is very unsuccessful. This costs money to put it in, costs money to try to keep it alive, and then it costs money to take it out and replace it. That is not a sustainable tree planting project. Here's one tree that did survive, right, because it's in a sandy soil. It's got a little bit more air, and if it wasn't over-irrigated, but look, it looks like a spider trying to crawl out of a hole as it sends its roots back up to the surface where they belong. And even these trees that survive, I wonder, you see this hinge that's created where that root turns? When these trees get large, if they make it that far, how is that going to affect our liability when that tree is moving back and forth in the wind? And then there's a hinge right here in the root system. There's actually a hinge also down here at the bottom where it connects to the tree. Are these trees actually going to be more likely to fall over? So there's many bad things associated with planting trees too deep. Now, I showed you a bald and burlap tree, but really our biggest problem is in container-grown trees, and it's how they're produced. As a tree's grown, and it's maybe grown in a 5-gallon container, and then maybe it's bumped up to a 15-gallon, and then a 30 or 25, however you're measuring those. And as it keeps getting bumped up, a lot of times when they're planting it, because that first container is smaller than the second container, they end up getting deeper and deeper and deeper in the soil. And this is just one that I looked at for a nursery. All of the material you see, this media, or now we call it substrate, that's around the outside edge of this root ball, is what was on top. You can see how high up the soil was, this media was up on the trunk. This is all the material I've taken off of the top, and I'm still 4 inches from that root flare. So I used to tell people, well, you want to plant trees so that the top of the root ball is at the surface or a few inches above the surface. I don't do that anymore because you can do that and plant it properly, and the root flare is still 6, 8 inches too deep in the soil, and the tree ends up dying. So the top of the root flare needs to be above the grade of the soil, right at the soil grade, or a few inches above. Or you will end up having a lot of problems, because although this media is really loose and it's designed for water to go through it, right? You got these holes in the bottom of the container over here, and it gets air inside the root ball in the nursery, and it will survive. Once you put it in the soil and you cut that off, that aeration off, and it's trying to grow, that's when they start to go downhill. So nurseries don't consider it to be a big problem. Here's looking at some dogwoods. This is one that's at the proper height. You can see it. But here's one that's 4 inches too deep. All right, well, it's not performing as well as the one that's planted properly in the container, but hey, it's still alive. You can still sell it. And then when you put that thing in the ground, it's going to die because it's too deep, and the root system will end up suffocating. Let me show you. I have to show you a little bit of research. I guess I'm required as a professor to show you some research, you know, with statistics and charts and graphs and tables and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so some of you aren't used to looking at that. Let me lead you into it. It's really easy. Okay, here's your first one. All right, simple pie chart. Easy to understand. All right, let me get to into the meat of this. This is a research done by Dr. Arnold at Texas A&M. He does lots of great research studies, and this is one of them. And what they did was planted crepe myrtle and ash trees and oleander trees and sycamores and vitex trees. And what they did is they planted some of them 3 inches below grade, right, where that root flare is just 3 inches below the soil surface. They planted some that were at grade, where you could see that those buttress roots coming out at the soil surface. Then they planted some where they were 3 inches above grade, where the root flare was 3 inches above the soil surface. And so what did they find? Well, on crepe myrtles, they found that a third of the trees died that were 3 inches too deep. All of them lived that were at grade or above. For ash trees, half of them died that were just 3 inches too deep. The other ones survived. When we look at oleander, a third of them died that were 3 inches too deep. The rest of them survived. And this kind of goes on and on. But even those that survived, if you look over here, here's the height in centimeters. How tall did they grow? Even those 4, or those 2/3 that survived, they only grew 130 centimeters versus 185 and 176 for those that were planted at the right height, or they came in the container at the right height and were planted properly. Same thing with the ash trees, 138 centimeters versus 170 and 194. So this thing is really critical. You don't think 3 inches is much, but 3 inches is a lot when we're planting those. And so if you plant these trees, let's say your crews are excellent, they plant everything, you know, just the way you told them on the root ball. But if you're getting this poor nursery stock in, then these trees are either going to die and you're going to have to replace them, or they're going to perform poorly and you're not going to be happy with them, and you're going to be trying to use all kinds of voodoo juice on them to get them to look better, when their problem is the root system suffocating, it's not performing well. And if the root system's suffocating and not performing well, it doesn't take up water well, you get transplant shock. And this could last a very long time. Just to give you a picture here to show you an example. It looks a little weird because there's a driveway here that I cut out, right? I took a picture of these trees on each side. When these were selected from the tree farm, they were identical, right? They wanted identical trees on either side of the drive going in. But you see, this is 6 months later. See, this one's still nice, green, and full. What in the world's going on with this one? And why is it performing poorly? They're getting the same maintenance. They were same tree, you know, from the same nursery. Everything's the same, except when I look, this one is planted at the proper height, and the one to the right is about 3 inches too deep. That's what 3 inches too deep will do on this tree. It didn't die, but it didn't grow well. And then if you get something like this, if you get a tree that wobbles around in the hole, you know that it's planted way too deep. It's a purple leaf plum. It's going to die anyway. So, but that's as critical to look for that. This is what you want to look for when buying nursery stock. You want to see those buttress roots on the top of the tree, or on the top of the root ball. This is critical. You'll be surprised at the difference that it makes in your budget, for one thing, but also in your peace of mind and your workload for taking care of trees. So let's switch gears again to another topic, girdles. I don't think too many, well, I don't know, maybe girdles are coming back. I'm getting old, so I'm not keeping up with the fashion. But I never thought girdles were that great of an idea because they squeeze parts that were supposed to go out and squeeze them in, right? Because no one would ever put a girdle on a tree. Okay, well, maybe some people do at weird colleges where weird things happen. But really, if you think about it, we put girdles on trees all the time, right? If you look at a tree's root system, this is the way a tree in an open area, and this is, you know, sort of a generalized tree, right? There's going to be some genetic differences, but tree roots grow where in response to water and air, right? So tree roots need air, and so they're going to be close to the surface. And tree roots explore a large volume of soil for water and minerals and other things that they need to mine from the soil to keep that tree alive. So a tree sort of looks like a wine glass on a dinner plate, right? Where the cup is the canopy, the stem is the trunk, and then that dinner plate is wide and shallow is that root system. Well, here's our girdle, right? When we're growing them in containers. So we've got this whole big root system. It's all squeezed inside a container, and so we get all these roots running through the container and circling around the outside of the container. And if we don't do something about these circling roots, they will continue to circle and create major problems. Just think, train up a tree in the way that it should grow, and when it is old, it will not depart from it. And so this is what ends up happening with these trees. Over time, what doesn't look like a big deal when you pull it out of the container can be a big deal over time, right? As those trees continue to grow in that direction and continue to increase in diameter, rather than growing out into the soil where they can get water and minerals. And also tree roots anchor trees, right? So roots have to go out into the soil to anchor that tree. Otherwise, we have to worry about these trees falling over. This is a really big problem that we see a lot. Now, a lot of folks have kind of figured this out by now, and they deal with these roots. We'll talk about some ways to deal with these roots on the outside. Here's the problem that I see a lot, is you can do everything right on your end and still have problems because the problem is on the inside. This was a 30-gallon tree, took the container off, shook the substrate out of it, and looked inside, and you can see those are the roots from the 15-gallon container that are still circling, still going in that circle. So even though you dealt with the ones on the outside, there is still a major structural problem within that root system. And when you plant them, they just don't stand up, and they have transplant shock, and they have nutrient deficiencies, and they have moisture stress. And you see something like this. When I go out to a property and people have me look at trees, first thing I'm going to look at are the trees that are still staked. Because if a tree has to be staked more than about 6 months, then there's something wrong with the root system on that tree. And most likely it's because the root system is circling, or it's deflected within that root ball, and it's not standing up on its own and creating lots of problems. Just show you a couple things that I've learned the hard way. I kind of like hurricanes a little bit because you learn a lot of stuff. This is when Hurricane Ike came through, and you're wondering, what am I looking at here? The top of the tree is up at the top. But this tree, a lot of new trees that were having nutrient deficiencies and that were drought stressed. This is when I really figured this problem out. It was after the hurricane, and it pushed them over, and I looked, and look, there's circling roots. There aren't roots growing out into the soil. This tree couldn't hold itself up. No wonder it was having nutrient deficiency problems. Because all the roots are, or not all of them, but most of the roots are still in that root ball. Then you look at this. I think this is really cool. Because this is a tree where the 15-gallon had circling or deflected roots in it, as did, well, which was affecting the 30-gallon tree. So when this tree blew over, the 30-gallon pulls up out of the ground because there aren't any roots growing out into the soil. These are trees that have been in the ground a year, at least. I don't remember exactly, but at least a year in the ground. So they fell over, and then the 15-gallon root ball slipped out of the 30-gallon because it never rooted out into that 30. So when you pull a tree out of a container and you go, wow, this is great, doesn't have a lot of circling roots, be afraid because there might be a problem on the inside. The best way to detect this is just to grab the tree with your hand. You don't have to be particularly strong, and just wobble it around, wiggle it around, and look at the root ball. If that whole container is moving, that's a good thing. You've got good rooting all the way out through the container. If you see a prior container, you see a root ball on the inside that's moving differently than the whole container, then you've got some deflected roots inside that root ball that are going to cause you problems. You won't see them, but you know they're there because you can wiggle them around. So you'd have to get in there and cut them, or better yet, go to another one. Now, over time, another problem can occur where you get these roots. Let's say maybe this was the roots that were circling the 5-gallon container. Well, roots get bigger in diameter, and so does the tree trunk. At some point in time, the two meet, and root tissue is different than trunk tissue. They don't usually fuse together. The roots end up, like putting a tourniquet on your arm, the roots end up girdling that tree, and you'll start to see half of the tree die, or whatever portion of that vascular system is being affected, you'll start to see that die. And these are girdling roots. And these are also worse on trees that are too deep in the container, right? Because the roots come up to the surface. When they come up to the surface and hit the edge of the container, they start growing in different directions, and they'll grow back across the trunk because they were too deep and cover those buttress roots and cover the trunk. So you get trees like this that had a girdling root, it killed the buttress roots or didn't allow it to root out, and then the tree ends up falling over. So yeah, it's a Bradford pear. It only had about 20 years in it anyway, 20 years of lifespan anyway. So, but these are the kind of things that we see, and that, hey, that's an expensive removal, that's a potential liability, that's planting another tree and going through the process again and losing 20 years of your hard work. So, how do we deal with this problem? Well, one is, and this is the way I was taught back in the day, was, you know, either pull them apart or to score the outside of the root ball with a knife or cut the roots that are circling around so that they will grow back out. And that's what was done in this picture. And if you look, that's how much root growth that they've gotten in 6 months. So roots are designed to grow fast and get back out into the soil. A lot of people have a problem with cutting roots and they're worried about it, but as you'll see in a minute, it's not that big a deal. This doesn't get roots that are deflected downwards or all of the roots, but it is one technique. Now, the late Bonnie Appleton at Virginia Tech, she had another technique that I liked, where she would take high-pressure water and she would wash the substrate off of the root ball. Then you get in there with hand pruners and you take out those defective roots, those that are deflected, that are circling, planted in the ground. You also get some advantages because the more of that organic material you can remove and replace with your existing soil on the site, the better, because a big root ball, organic root ball, artificial root ball, is much more difficult to irrigate, and you have a lot of problems. The problem with this technique, though, is it takes a lot of time and it makes a mess. So I like a technique that I first heard of from Ed Gilman, who's standing there in the background keeping an eye on Bonnie, and that is just slicing off the outside of the root ball, very similar to the way that you slice the rind off of a pineapple. Right? You just slice off an outer inch or so of the root ball, depending upon the size of the container, and spin it around and then lay it on its side and cut the bottom of it off. This works great. And I can tell you from Texas, my concern was when we had to plant some of these in the summer and it's over 100 degrees, are these trees going to die? They do not miss a beat because we can lose a lot of the root system. And these trees that I've been doing this to root firmly in the ground in about 3 months, depending upon the time of year that you do that. And you can take any staking off that you have, and they grow tremendously fast, have not lost a one doing this. Matter of fact, they perform better than all of the others. So just slicing it off. You can use a hand saw. I'll use a pruning saw a lot of times, silky saw to cut it off. You can use a reciprocating saw or saber saw to do this. So there's some different options, and usually it peels right off, and it's very quick, easy to clean up. Fixes all those deflected roots outside the root ball. Does not do anything for those inside. So you want to get a root ball that doesn't have deflected roots on the inside, or you have to dig in there and get those so that they will grow out of the root ball. Solves a lot of problems, very cheap, very cost effective down in the long term. And then there's just some trees we shouldn't buy. That tree can't even stay up in the container. Look how overgrown it is, too, based on the container size. That's one of the reasons that this ANSI standard is so important, is if you let that tree get too big for the root ball size, you're more likely to have all of these deflected roots, major, big deflected roots. And when you cut those off, that could cause more problems. And so that's another benefit to this root ball sizing. And you get some, but trees like that, they're just not worth it. They're goners. They won't survive. There's nothing you can do to fix them. And I've seen plenty of trees that look just like this out of the container that somebody probably got for a good deal. And if you see trees where the root is coming out of the bottom of the container is as big as the top, well, you don't even want to take this tree if it's free. So, because there's not much that you can do for those trees, and it's just not worth it. Like I said, even if they're free, they're going to cost you money. So I mentioned before, people worry a lot about cutting roots when planting trees. The trees are designed to rapidly regrow roots, and it's really amazing. We can take bald and burlap trees growing out in the field. We cut off 95% of the rooting area. That means we're only harvesting about 5% of the roots, give or take, somewhere between 2 to 8% of the root ball is harvested. We could move that thing down the road 1,000 miles and replant them, and they do very well. So don't get too concerned. And that example I gave you for container grown trees, you're not nearly cutting off 95% of the root system on those, maybe 10%. They regrow roots and do really well. Let me give you an example. I do training for nurseries on how to grow trees that arborists want, at least many arborists want. And this is what was left over from a really crappy tree. And it just had deflected roots. And so I took it out, shook all the media off of it. You can see it. You know, there's a major one coming down here. And I got out the hand pruners, and I took out at least 60 to 70% of that root system. It was major surgery on this thing. Stuck it back in the container for the nursery. The arborist that I was with said, "Oh, man, that tree's a goner." This is that tree 3 months later. It didn't miss a lick, cutting all those roots off. And eventually it regrew a normal root system and recovered and did fine. So just to show you this another way, this is, you know, if you're taking soil core, if you're out in this tree farm and you're taking soil cores and you wash the soil out and you measure the roots and you take a picture of the root length density, you know, you get something like this. These are the roots that are extending out 150 centimeters out from that tree. But when they're ball and burlap, when they're harvested, only this amount of the root system's taken. All that is left in the field, and yet we can do that very successfully. So let me show you what happens. This is either cutting off the outside of the root ball of a container-grown tree, or using balled and burlap tree, or planting a bare root tree. This is you can see the white roots that are coming out when you cut the roots, and you can see the cut ends here where the roots were cut. Right at the end of the root, a couple of inches back, is where you start to see new roots regenerate. So for those of you who are in the South and you see people committing crepe myrtle, topping crepe myrtles, and you see how it comes out, it's very similar to that with the root system. This is 1 week after the roots were cut. So those roots start growing really fast. That tree starts recovering immediately after the roots are cut. So if we kind of look at this over time, and you see the blue arrows, that's where the roots were cut. This is just a few months after planting. That's how much the root system has grown. Now, if you look out here, you can see the tips were cut off, so these roots are much longer than this. But you start to get a really dense root system, and you get those roots growing out into the soil, taking up water and minerals. That is your goal for planting trees, is to get that root system out in the soil as quickly as possible, because that's when you get to quit watering them, and that's when they start growing and start providing benefits. Not that small trees don't provide benefits, but the bigger they are, the more benefits they provide. And so getting those roots to grow out quickly is important. So when you're buying, if you're buying balled and burlap trees, make sure that they're cured. You know, they've sat in the nursery a little while. They've got some new root tips. They've started growing. This is a little bit much over here because you're going to damage them planting them. But then planting them in the ground, and if you do it the right time of year, they're successful. Even in Texas, I've planted a lot of balled and burlap trees in the summertime if they have the proper root ball on it. So even with that 5% root ball, they can survive. It is a challenge, I will admit. So how do we decrease that challenge a little bit? Well, if you took one of those balled and burlap trees, you cut them and you put the root ball on them, if you were to shake all the soil off, this is about what your 2 to 8% of the root system looks like. However, if you root prune them first, you can greatly increase the density of those roots. And so you should have trees root pruned prior to, you don't want to call and get trees and they dug them last month, right? You want them to be to root prune, be filled out, be cured, and develop a good root system. This has only been root pruned once. This one has been root pruned twice. That looks like a whole lot like a container grown tree once you've cut off the outside deflected roots and you shake the substrate out of it. And so what does that mean? When you plant them in the landscape, here's just some examples. This is a tree that was not root pruned. This is one that was root pruned last year and 2 years ago. You can see by looking at them how much better they are because that root system is better able to absorb water and minerals and send them to the canopy that's transpiring water off the leaves. And so, yeah, this tree over here is going to survive. It just has more transplant shock than those. but it's going to grow slower. You might get more complaints about it, and so it's better to just have a better root ball. Now, when you're planting, and as you get bigger root balls in balled burlap, they've got burlap wrapped around them usually, and then they've got a wire basket to help hold that root ball together. Once you get that root ball firmly planted in the soil so that it's holding itself up, you need to take the wire off and the burlap off. About the top 12 to 18 inches, because that's where most of your roots are. We're not too concerned about what's below that. So if you look, this is a tree that I saw it planted 25 years ago. And this isn't even the really nice wire baskets. This is field fencing that was used for the root ball. Look, there it is 25 years later. Still there, doesn't rust. People say, oh, you plant in the ground, it'll rust. No, it won't, not in any time frame that we would like for it to, because you can see how big this tree is. And you can see it's already starting to cut into the buttress roots on this. And it's not just the metal, there's the twine. These are the same trees, 25 years old. Look, that plastic twine out in the sun, you would have thought that it would have broken down. It's still there. And I've seen a lot of trees die being girdled by the twine that's on the root ball. I've even seen trees that died from the tree tag, the little plastic tree tag that was on the trunk that ended up girdling the tree. Here's another thing you probably find hard to believe. On another tree that's over 25 years old, you can still see the burlap. This is not natural burlap. Natural burlap usually degrades within a year, and if you knew for sure you had natural burlap, you could leave it on. It wouldn't be a major issue, although it would cause deflected roots. But a lot of the burlap we use is either treated burlap or worse, synthetic burlap, which is what this is. When you look at this, it looks like real burlap, natural burlap, but it's not, and you can see how long it lasts. I've dug up plenty of trees that were more than 20 years old that were doing poorly that I thought for another reason, and it's because they left the synthetic burlap on. And once you light it with the cigarette lighter, instead of ashing up like normal burlap does, it melts like plastic because it is plastic. So all that needs to come off. And this is just another, you're like, what am I looking at? This is a tree, an unsuccessful tree planting. It had sun scald on the side. That's lag balsam that's been painted on it, just for looks, maybe to inhibit decay causing organisms. But they had to be replanted. And so you cut them off and you look on the inside of the trunk, and now you see how much damage was done throughout the trunk. The reason these trees get sun scald, people want to put trunk wraps and all those things on them, is because right underneath the bark is where the vascular system is. And if that root system is functioning properly, it will pull water up and it will cool the outside of the bark off. It takes that heat up to the top and it's transpired and evaporated. When anything is causing the root system to not operate properly, poor root architecture, in this case these trees were about 3 inches too deep, that sun on the west side, usually in the late afternoon, heats up the bark. There's not enough water coming through there to cool it off, and you get sun scald. So sun scald problems are a planting problem. It's not a lack of shade problem in most instances. So let's talk a minute about where you're going to plant these things. You need to provide enough space. This is one showing a tree in, your common tree well downtown, and they excavated the root system. And you can see this yellow card was put back here so that you can see the roots, that they're deflected down because underneath the pavement the soil is too compacted to allow roots to grow through. Let me just show you an example. This is a great classic example. These trees were planted about 6 years, I think, before this photograph. Willow oak, same time, same size, same nursery. Look at the difference in size. And probably when the designer, landscape architect, engineer, whoever drew this thing, when they drew the picture, just like you saw in Nancy's picture, they have these nice big canopies, and you think, oh, this is going to be beautiful. Well, that's fantasy. This is reality, because roots need enough space to grow. So if you look at these are tree wells that they were planted in versus a lawn allowing these trees to grow out further and explore the soil for more water and minerals. So you see how much bigger the canopy is. See how darker green it is than these over here. Essentially, all that happened with these trees was that they were repotted into a bigger container. And now they're constricted within that container. So you have to have enough size to grow trees. And as I think about this, kind of made me think about my childhood. Here I am, that good-looking, handsome devil on the left. By the way, I sound a lot taller on the internet than I really am. But true story, the guy standing next to me who looks nothing like me is actually my little brother. And as I thought about this, and my little brother's 6 feet tall now, and my driver's license says 5 foot, which is close. And I thought about this, and I thought, you know what? My little brother had a bigger room than I had when we were growing up. I think that's the reason. So, but for sure, for trees, you got to give them enough space. You know, I was going to an ISA conference many years ago. Took the family. We were going to Nashville, driving from Texas, see the sights. So I'm driving along. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not to that story yet. I forgot I threw these in just to give you an example of what you could do in an urban area. You can see some big trees here growing in a small area, and as you look closer at them, they don't have a very big tree well to grow in, but what they used was they used a pervious paver, right, a permeable and porous, allowing water to go through, and they used structural soil underneath it to provide enough rooting area for these trees to get to be a decent size, and I'm sure they're bigger now. It's been a few years since I took this photograph. So there's silvicells, there's structural soils, there's pervious pavement. We have several ways of actually being able to grow some decent-sized trees, just like in the drawings, in an urban area if you provide enough space. So back to my story of going to Nashville. So I'm going through Little Rock, and I see the sign that says the Clinton Library, Presidential Library, and I thought, well, you know, in College Station here at Texas A&M, we have the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library, so I'll just see what theirs looks like. And, of course, the first thing I see, sycamores planted in these little narrow strips that aren't as wide as a sycamore trunk will eventually be. And I thought, good grief. Can't believe they didn't leave enough space for these trees to grow to a different height or a decent size. Then I looked at the library and I thought, oh my. I thought, you know, that thing sort of looks like a double-wide trailer house on stilts. And then if you look at it from across the river, that's exactly what it looks like. And so then I thought, well, you know, it's in Arkansas, so maybe it culturally fits within the landscape. So anyway, if anybody out there is from Arkansas, I apologize for that terrible joke. Let's look at when we're actually planting the trees. This is something that's going to cost you a little bit more up front, but be better off long term, and that's digging a wide enough hole for those roots to grow out, because what we want to do is loosen the soil to make it as easy as possible for that root system to grow out into the soil. So the recommendation is usually 2 to 5 times the diameter of the root ball. Most people are doing 2 times because it's less expensive. But hey, you get a backhoe, it's easy to do 5 times, and it's actually fun. The technique that I use, right, because our goal is not to see how much dirt we can put over in a pile and then turn upside down and put back in the soil, but our goal is to loosen the soil. So what I usually do is the areas where we're going to plant trees, I go in with a rototiller and till down as deep as I can, use about 8 inches, with a rototiller through that whole area to break up the soil and loosen it up. Now the topsoil is still up at the top, and it's nice and loose. Then dig the hole, a small hole, which is a lot cheaper, and now it's easier to dig, at least the top 8 inches, because we've rototilled it. Dig that by hand, and then you can set the root ball right down into the hole and essentially accomplish the same thing without spending as much energy. Now, since I talked bad about the Clinton Library, now I'll talk bad about the Bush Library. That way, you know, I don't show any preferences. This was at the Bush Library. I was there when they were planting the trees, and all kinds of things are done wrong. The main thing in this one is they dug a hole that was square, like the boxes that the trees came in, and it was only about 1 inch wider on each side of the hole to put these trees in. So what they have to do, they had to take the box off before they planted the tree, which meant there was nothing to grab hold of to pick the tree up except the trunk. And so they caused damage to the trunk. They put these things in with a shoehorn to get them into the hole, and a lot of these trees ended up dying or performing poorly. They couldn't root out in the soil. They had damage to the trunk, and it's not a good thing. Trees should be planted by picking them up from the root ball rather than the trunk. I mean, I wouldn't want someone wrapping a strap around my arm and picking me up by my arm, because it'd probably pull my arm out and give me a rope burn on my arms and those kind of things. So let's look at a concept here that I think is really important. I'm going to show you some recent research on this. This is from Dr. Watson, not a different one than me, Dr. Gary Watson. If you see us together, you'll realize we're not twins. And he produced a paper with a model, and essentially the model is that tree roots grow the same distance whether it's a big tree or a small tree. Okay, and that's essentially true looking at some studies we've seen, but there are some differences. But we're going to just kind of take that concept here. So if you plant a small tree, and it's got to regrow its dinner plate, right? It's, depending on the size of the tree, it might take 1, 2, in this instance, 3 years for that root system to grow back out to what it would be for another tree of that size that was never planted. Now that tree can actively take up water and minerals and grow at its maximum rate. Versus a large tree down here on the bottom, it might take, in this instance, 6 years for it to grow its root system out in the soil. So in that period of time, it's growing slower. It's putting its carbohydrates into growing roots, and it's growing more slowly. And we see that if we look at some of the research. This is, if we look over here on the y-axis here, we'll see that the this is the percent of the lateral root spread of the root system. If we look over on the z-axis, we'll see it's the twig growth. And essentially what you're seeing here is, when we take a tree and it's got 100% of its root system and we cut off a large portion of the root system, ball and burlap it, and move it, that trunk, the twig growth slows way down because it's using its carbohydrates to recover from that stress. As the root system returns back to 100%, then we'll also see twig growth start to increase in its amount of growth. Twig growth and trunk growth as well. So here's what you get. It's kind of interesting. These are with spruce trees, and if you'll see the black line in the center, the circle, that's the diameter of the tree when it was planted. So the tree on the left was the small tree when it was planted, and the tree on the right was the big tree when it was planted. But because of what I just mentioned, it took that large tree much longer, nearly 4 years, about 4 years, 5 years before it returned to its normal growth rate, it regrew its root system, versus that first tree, which did it in less than 2 years. So then it started growing more quickly while the other one was still recovering, and you actually ended up with a bigger tree over a 5-year period than what you had. And I think this is critical, especially when you got a few dollars that you're trying to figure out how to spend. And so let's look at some research. This is brand new. Was on the committee for graduate students. She was excellent. She just graduated. And here's some pictures from her research, which is 2 growing seasons. It wasn't even really 2 years. And if you look at the top photo, you can see the little trees that she planted. She planted some 1 gallon, 3 gallon, 7 gallon, all the way up to 45-gallon trees. And this is just looking at it over time. Well, you look at that bottom photograph versus the top one, and you can't even tell which trees were the little ones that were planted. And so let me show you some of the research on this. And I just took a couple of the trees that she used, the red maple and the Vitex Tree. And let me explain this. If you look on the y-axis, this is the container sizes, right? 10, 20, 30-gallon containers, or number 10, number 20, number 30s. And on the bottom, this is the container size that was initially planted. The one on the y-axis is the one that you ended up with. So let me show you what this is. So on the red maple, they planted a 3-gallon red maple tree. By the end of 2 growing seasons, like I said, it wasn't really 2 years, it was just 2 growing seasons, that was already a 15-gallon tree. And the 7-gallon tree that they planted in 2 growing seasons ended up being a 20-gallon tree. The 25 didn't grow quite as much. It was only a 30-gallon tree, and the 45 ended up just barely being a 50-gallon tree. Same thing, only much more dramatic, occurred on the Vitex Tree. The 1-gallon tree in this instance ended up being almost a 20-gallon tree in 2 growing seasons. The 3 ended up being a 35. The 7 ended up being about a 30. The 25 ended up being about a 40, and then the 45 ended up being about a 50. So you see this dramatic growth with these young trees in a short period of time because they can become established so quickly. So what that means for you is you're not going to have to water them as long, right? It also means that you can spend a few bucks And then in 2 years, you can end up with a tree that's worth what you spent a lot of bucks for. Let's just look at the Vitex tree. If you planted a 3-gallon Vitex tree in 2 growing seasons, that tree is the same size as the 25-gallon that you planted. So you could have saved a lot of money if you can wait 2 years. And you would have had a lot less maintenance expense and other problems. So let's put some numbers to that, which is what Lauren did. And so what she found out, she looked at your return on investment, your profit loss, and factored in things like mulching and how long we have to water and how much the plant cost and what you ended up with and those kind of things. And this is what you can see. The 3-gallon tree ended up having a $120 return on investment. The 7-gallon, a little less than $100. When you get into these bigger gallon sizes, on the red maple, you sort of broke even. If you go to the Vitex tree and look at the 45-gallon trees, you actually lost money during that time period. So it's really cost effective to plant those smaller tree sizes. And you know what? In a couple of years, you end up with what you would have had anyway. This is a concept most people don't realize, and I understand too, because I deal with a lot of clients. Hey, I want impact. I want initial impact. So I understand that. For getting that initial impact, but if what you want is a mature urban forest, you're better off starting with a smaller tree. And if you want that initial impact, instead of planting the 100-gallon, maybe plant the 45. And so that you will still get some initial impact, but still end up saving money versus the 100-gallon and end up with a larger tree. So here in the waning moments, let me just deal with a couple things on tree planting. If I can get the slide to change. There we go. Mulching. So this termite mound mulching is a bad idea. This is the same thing, and Dr. Arnold saw this in his research. 3 inches of mulch on top of the root ball can do the same thing as being planted 3 inches too deep. So they didn't use too much mulch here. It just needs to be spread out a little wider, but be shallow. Ed Gilman, last time I talked to him, recommended no mulch on top of the root ball so that it can get air and those kind of things, and then only about 1 inch or so deep out from that. And I agree with that, although I still have trouble not putting a little bit on top of the root ball, so I'm still kind of stuck on 0.5%, or I'm sorry, 0.5 inch on top of the root ball. Here's what you need. People say, how wide should I make that mulch ring? I say so wide that you're embarrassed to tell people you planted the trees, because it reduces competition and other things as long as it's not deep. Other issue, staking trees. Not all trees have to be staked, but a lot of trees have to be staked because you're in a windy area or you're using container grown material that has a light organic root ball and it's not heavy enough to hold the tree upright. But we have a lot of problems with staking trees, right? So you get something like this. This is one of the typical, municipal tree plantings. 100-piece band comes out. Everybody's all excited. We're saving the earth. We're planting trees. This is wonderful. This is beautiful. No money in there to take care of them afterwards. So nobody even comes by and takes the stakes off because there's one urban forester or small committee that's trying to manage this, and so then a big wind comes in on this tree and poop, breaks it right off. That was a total waste of money on that. So maybe we need another staking system. Well, that one's not a good one. For one, it's causing damage to the trunk. Well, maybe you could deal with that, right, by putting a shoe on it. Hey, if this is an Air Jordan, maybe you can pump it up and make it cushier. That's not a good solution. Maybe you need to bring in the engineers and the designers to really think of something that's going to work. That's another one that's not a good solution. I've seen all kinds of staking solutions. Let's just talk about the main ones. These where they're staked with guy wires, right? These where we've got lodge poles or we've got T-stakes that are in there and with something holding the tree upright. The problem with both of these is there's a liability. I've seen reports from people getting clotheslined seriously. Little kids running, people tripping over them, those kind of things. They don't allow the tree to move, so the tree doesn't develop good trunk taper, right? A tree needs to move, develop a good flaring of the trunk, some thickness on the trunk, a trunk taper, so that it's stronger. This first one I think is the worst because you put this whatever kind of strap, water hose, whatever you're using in the crotch of a tree, those get covered up faster because not only do you have the tree trunk getting bigger, but you also have the branch getting bigger at the same time, so they cover twice as fast. the tree grows around it twice as fast as this one. Here's the method that I like to use, and there's some patented methods too that are out there that are the similar form as this. This one says wood dowels. I usually use a 1-inch survey stakes and just toenail that root ball to the ground. Just run the right. You need a wooden stake that's going to degrade, right? You don't want one that's treated. So you want one that's going to rot over time, and just drive them through the ground and hold that root ball steady and let the top sway. These work really well. There's no liability. Nobody's going to trip over them. They're quick and easy and cheap to put in. They actually use less materials. And after your big 100-piece van ceremony to plant trees, you can walk away, except for watering, and you never have to come take stakes off of this. And it works really, really well. So let's talk about watering. Just got a few slides left. And then we'll be done. You got to get water to these things. A lot of places, maybe you don't have an irrigation system. And even with an irrigation system, that root ball may dry out quickly because all the roots are still in the root ball. So there's ooze tubes. This is a tree gator. There's some different methods to try to make it easier. You can make a dike around the tree and fill it up with water. Some way, as long as it's getting water and not drying out without being overwatered, which is difficult. I always, when I plant a tree, put an observation tube vertically, like a drain line next to it, so you can look down and make sure the hole's not filling up with water. Ends up working great. So these tree gators, over about an 8-hour period, they slowly let their water out and greatly improve the survival of the trees, because they do need water until they grow roots out into the soil. But you don't need this much. I get clients all the time tell me, oh, no, I haven't been overwatering. So I go over the water meter or valve box and I pull it up and I point and I go, that's your water table. So that's the reason your trees are dying, is because you got too much water. So water's critical. I'm not giving it enough time, but it is really critical for planting new trees. And that maybe is another talk. So in this one, I just wanted to show you some simple stuff. All right, because the solution is simple. You just have to think about it. Like this guy. Unless this guy's trying to build up his beer drinking arm, there's a simpler and easier way to deal with this problem if he just uses his head. And so I think that's one of the things that we do. So for us, we waste a lot of money, especially at the beginning, which costs us a lot of time and money, and ultimately we don't get what we want. Hopefully, this brief overview has given you a few ways to build a better
Thank you very much, Todd. And so I'm going to turn this over now to Nancy so that she can facilitate fielding questions. Please, I want to remind everyone, use the chat box located in the lower left-hand side of your window to put in your questions. And then also, when we get closer to the end of the question and answer period, shortly before 3:30 Eastern Time, then I will send everyone the link to participating in the survey quiz and to qualify for their continuing education credit. So Nancy, I'm going to let you and Todd take over.
Okay, thanks, and thanks, Todd, for the presentation. If anybody has any questions they want to type into the chat box, that would be great. We do have a few minutes, so if you want any additional clarification, that would be a good time. I will note that Addie...
name of the book, question, what was the name of the book I recommended? I didn't write it down. Which book did I recommend? Oh, the ANSI Standards, probably. The ANSI Z60.1. If you search for American Standards for Nursery Stock, a bunch of them will come up. You'll find the 2004 version most likely, but there is a 2014. And if I, instead of going back in the slideshow, well, let me do that. Maybe. So you can see it, so you'll know when you get to it exactly what to look for. You know what, there's probably a faster way to do this.
And I asked Addie as well to post the link there. I'm just reposting. If you want to see what shearing the root ball looks like, there is a link to a website in Pennsylvania called Tree Tenders. Their third video.
So it's published by American Hort, if that helps.
Any other questions?
Oh, see, I learned something every time. That I learned a lot. For your information, pound cake is named for the amount of many of the ingredients, a pound of each. Did not know that. Well, I still think they should get sued. No, not really. But you know what? There is one thing I'll tell you on that. And I keep saying it because I'm old and I've always said it this way. I'd say 15 gallon, 30 gallon. But actually, when you write stuff out, you should put number 15 or number 25 or number 45, because someone actually was sued because it wasn't actually 45 gallons. It was, and so if you see them number 45, that's the way that we refer to them now. Oh my. The advice for anyone experiencing the same sort of weather that's attacking Texas right now, you wouldn't believe what I've seen in the last couple of days. It's been incredible. I'd get a big boat. But as far as trees are concerned, well, in Texas we had a drought in 2011 like they're having in California now. And we lost a lot of trees. I've worked on some sites, they lost 50% of their large tree canopy because of the drought. If this rain keeps up, so far in the part of Texas I'm in, so far we've had more days that it's rained than not rain. I feel like I'm in Oregon or something. But if this keeps up for some of our tree species, we might end up losing more trees than we lost in the drought. Not a good solution, except think drainage when you're planting new trees. I looked at some yesterday that I was a little concerned about, but when I got there, they were huge trees brought out of Florida. They had drainage underneath them, so that actually helped. Okay, here's a question. Once a tree has been improperly planted, too deep, circling roots, etc., are there methods to correct, or is it a losing proposition? It could be one or the other. Some trees that are, let me deal with too deep first. Some trees that are too deep, sometimes you can lower the soil around them, just so, if it's up on a high area. Sometimes you have to dig them back up, and the sooner after planting that you can do that, the better, and then reset them at the proper height. Some of them that have been that way for a while, we can actually pick them up with a tree spade and add some soil to the bottom of the hole so they'll set up at the proper height, and then replant them with a tree spade. For deflected roots, circling roots, those kind of things, I've had really good success with taking a really sharp sharpshooter or some type of saw, something that you stick down in the, you wiggle the tree to find out where those deflected roots are, because it'll still be there. And then you either push that shovel down in the soil about 18 inches, whatever the depth of the root ball, sort of like slicing a pizza, where you go from the trunk and you slice out, and I usually make 8 pizza slices on it. You slice out all the way to the edge of the root ball. That at least gets the circling roots. And when you cut them, they grow out from the tree. I've had some trees make miraculous recovery. It takes about a year for that to happen. It doesn't necessarily get those that are deflected down, right? Those are easier to miss. Sometimes you might have to use an air knife, air spade, an air excavation tool to work around them and cut them with hand pruners. But you can, some of those you can rehabilitate. Now, some of the pictures I showed where they were 2-inch diameter roots and it was in a big mass at the bottom, you can't do anything about those. But some of them you can save.
So any more questions?